In this video, we'll be talking about different kinds of frequency tables and how to create frequency tables. I'll go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll get started. When we're talking about visualizing data with tables and graphs, the first question that we have to ask is, why do we use tables and graphs? Why are these important to begin with? And the fact is that tables and graphs can help summarize our data by giving an organized way to view data quickly and efficiently and to be able to see if there are any patterns in the data. Figures and tables can show us the shape of our distribution, the most frequent score, whether there are outliers or not. And if we're trying to compare different groups statistically, we can start by visually comparing our groups using graphs. And this is why it's really important, regardless of what kind of analysis we're doing, to always make sure that we have a table or a graph to begin with. That's usually the first step we'll take before we even analyze our data, is to create some kind of table or graph so that we can visualize our data. As we start talking about frequency and frequency tables, the first question that we'll have is, what is frequency? And if we look up the definition of the frequency in the dictionary, it's the rate at which something occurs or is repeated over a particular period of time. Our definition is going to be the number of scores with a particular value. And so with this, the number of times something occurs, the number of times that number is repeated in our data set, the number of different scores with a particular value. And so our frequency table is going to show how many times each score occurred. We're going to have 4 steps for making a frequency table, and we'll walk through these steps, and then we'll go step by step with an example. For step 1, we're going to list each possible value from lowest to highest. It's important that we list each possible value, not just the values that we have in our data set, but each possible value for our measurement. For step 2, we're going to go one by one through our scores and make a tally mark for each score next to its value on the list. Step 3 is we're going to write the number of how many times each value on your list was used. And step 4, we're going to figure out the percentage of those scores for each value. Let's try an example. For step 1 in this example, our research study used a pain scale that ranged from 0, meaning our patient or participant had no pain, to 10, meaning that they were in extreme pain. So for step 1, we're going to list each possible value from lowest to highest. If you want to, give it a try now. Draw it out as I go through the steps, and pause if you ever need a little bit more time for any particular step. So in this case, we know that we're going to have a pain scale from 0 to 10. So we're going to have our values from 0 to 10. We're not even looking at our scores yet. We're just listing every possible value, whether or not it was used. Whether or not a participant ever actually gave that pain rating doesn't matter yet, because we're just listing every possible value. Oops. There we go. For step 2, we're going to go through one by one, looking at the scores that we have, the data that we've gotten from our participants, and we're going to make a tally mark next to each value on the list. So for instance, my first number here is 8, so I'll make a tally mark next to the value of 8 in the table. The next score is 2, so I'll make a tally mark next to the value of 2, and so on. When we're done, the final product is going to look like this. So we have 3 tally marks next to number 1 for 3 people who rated their pain out of 1. There aren't any tally marks next to 0 or 10 because we don't have any scores of 0 or 10. No one actually gave us those readings when we collected our data, but we still have those values as possible values represented in that first column. For step 3, now we're going to just add the number for how many tally marks we need. And so this is going to be our third column, and we're just going to write that number for the value for that particular score, how many people had that value, that particular score that is. And that's going to be our frequency. Since we don't have any tally marks for 0, the frequency there will be 0. Since we have 3 tally marks for the pain rating of 1, our frequency there will be 1, and so on and so on. And if we complete this process, we'll get something that looks like this. This last step is a little bit more involved, but still very straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to calculate the percentage of scores for each value. We'll use these step-by-step instructions to do this. So to get the percentage, we're first going to take the frequency of a particular value, and we're going to divide that by the total number of scores. And then we're going to take that answer and multiply it by 100. So for example, if we have 4 participants who rated their pain level at a 3, we have a frequency of 4 there. To calculate the percent, we're going to take that 4, divide it by the total number of scores, which we could go back to this slide here and count up how many scores we have, or we can add up our frequencies and we'll find out that our total number of scores is 20. And so if we have 20 scores total, we're going to divide that 4 by the total number, which is 20. And I can do this on a calculator. And so once I've divided that, I'll find out that I have 4 divided by 20 is going to be 0.20. And we're going to multiply that answer of 0.20 by 100, which if I do, we'll get 20. And so the percent that we see in that last column, we're going to make a 4th column here with our percents. And for this particular frequency, this particular value of 3, with a frequency of 4, we'll get that the percentage of that is going to be 20. We're going to do that for every frequency of every value in our frequency table. And when we do, we'll get something that looks like our completed frequency table here. You'll notice that going from step 3 to step 4, I've actually taken out that tally column. We don't really need that. We can think of our frequency column as replacing the tally. And the tally column is really just the work that we do in order to produce the frequency. Then we can calculate the percentage from that frequency. And so we can put those tallies on the side if we want. You can erase that column if you want when you finish the frequency. You can also just leave it in. For the purpose of this class, I suggest that you leave in that tally column. And so you'll wind up with 4 columns total, although you'd probably take out that tally column if you were presenting or publishing your data. There are other kinds of frequency tables as well, and so we'll go over these also. But the important thing to remember is that for each type of frequency table, the instructions of how to make that table are really just the same. They're going to be different in very, very slight ways, and they're really all just variations on the same theme. For instance, this is an example of a completed frequency table for a nominal or a categorical variable. In our case, nominal or categorical variable here and is going to be specialty. And you can see that the only difference here is really that we can see that we have these different categories. We have names instead of numbers as our possible values. And so here we have our different specialties. So here we have cardiology, pulmonology, neurology, and then we have another section here. And so we have these names of categories, names of groups rather than numbers as our possible values. But we're still going to tally the number of times that a particular name or category was selected. We're still going to write in the number of the frequency that we tallied, and we're still going to calculate the percentage the exact same way. And so all of the steps are going to be the same. It's just that now we're working with names or categories of groups instead of numbers as our possible values and scores. So if here we were, maybe we have a list of different specialties, maybe patients that are seeing particular people in different particular specialties. So maybe instead of having we're going to have cardiology, and there's 5 different lines for cardiology, and we're going to group this as this frequency of 5 for cardiology. Lastly, we have a grouped frequency table. With a grouped frequency table, this is just a normal frequency table, and we're going to have numbers again. But instead of having individual values for those possible that possible values column, that first column, we're going to use a group of values. And specifically, we're going to talk about this as being an interval of values. So for instance, we can have possible values ranging from 1 to 10, and we can have intervals of, for instance, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, and 9 to 10. In this case, the interval would be 2, meaning that there are 2 scores grouped together for each interval. Generally speaking, we probably wouldn't use a grouped frequency table if we only had possible values from 1 to 10. We actually really use a grouped frequency table, usually when there are so many possible values that the frequency table would be too long and too cumbersome to be useful. Remember that the entire point of using tables and graphs is that we want to be able to see all this information really quickly and really efficiently. For instance, if I had 100 possible values, that would be really long, and I'm not going to be able to easily see what's going on in the data. So I might want to group those numbers. Maybe I would group them using an interval of 5 or an interval of 10 to condense the information for the 100 possible values. A grouped frequency table would be a much better choice in that case. The benefit is that we can present information quickly and in a more understandable way, in this consolidated kind of way. The drawback, on the other hand, is that in a grouped frequency table, we lose some information. For instance, once we've made our grouped frequency table, so if I have this one right here, we don't know how many scores were a 1 or a 2. We can see that the frequency for a peen rating of 1 or 2 is 6, but we can only see that number of people who chose 1 or 2, either or. We don't know how many chose 1 and how many chose 2 specifically. And so we lose a little bit of information about the individual frequencies for each individual value. We can only see them within that interval. And so we only really want to do this when there are too many possible values that it's going to be difficult to do it as an individual value. And so this is an example of what that would look like. And so we have our possible values, we have our frequency, we have our percentage. This is all just the same, just with intervals of values instead of individual values.